Welcome into edition 155 of the Owner to Owner podcast. Jon Manning joins me today from pricingprofits.com. Very big welcome, Jon, and thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Jon is a pricing strategy innovator. So we're going to talk a lot about pricing, the psychology, the practical aspects, where the opportunities are for small business owners. Jon's founder of pricingprofits.com, which was the world's first crowdsourced pricing advisory service. He's very much a thought leader on the topic of pricing on LinkedIn, a mentor and a trained economist. He'll introduce himself shortly. What we're going to chat about today is the concept of pricing is a very underused lever in improving small business profitability and in turn valuation. We're going to touch on the psychology of pricing and talk a little bit about discounting, a little bit about moving away from, for some, a traditional way of coming up with a price, which is a cost plus model, and talk about how other ways to demonstrate your value through, premium or better pricing. So again, welcome, Jon. Tell us about yourself and Pricing Profits.
Okay, so I've probably had what you would call a portfolio career, and I've probably spent 50% of my career in corporates and the other 50% freelancing. I'm full-time freelancing at the moment. Either as a pricing advisor or fractional head of pricing. And the business, as you mentioned, is called Pricing Profits. The listeners and viewers will see a bit of a play on words when they look up the spelling of profits. But, it doesn't matter whether my roles
You're of the foretelling variety.
Yes. But it doesn't really matter where my roles have been, whether corporate or freelancing. They've always been in the fascinating and often neglected world of pricing.
Well, it's an interesting and very relevant background, Jon. I'm going to start with the psychological question. In your experience, is it common for business owners to rarely increase their prices for whatever reason and to keep the prices where they were or even discounting?
One of my very first clients was a ceramic tile company in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. And the reason they contacted me was because they hadn't changed their prices in 17 years. And they didn't know how to do it. I don't encounter too many companies these days that have waited 17 years to change their pricing. If I met someone today, you just have a think about that. The last time they would have changed their prices was when Kevin Rudd and George W. Bush were in charge. The GFC, the Beijing Olympics and so forth. It is a long time not to change prices. Yeah. So I think people have... they are changing their prices more frequently, and certainly the CPI numbers during that post-COVID period certainly reflected that. The quality of those price changes, there's good examples and there's lots of bad examples, but I don't think many companies these days do nor can afford to leave things for 17 years.
What was behind 17 years, do you think?
That's a really good question, and it was so long ago that I can't recall off the top of my head. But I think there's probably a nervousness about losing customers, which I think a lot of people, even today, still have that concern. How to communicate the price increases? Like, do you put your hands up and say, sorry, we forgot to do this for the last 17 years, but we're sort of playing catch up now. And I think one of the real hurdles, and this is particularly so with small businesses providing services, and often those services are delivered personally, is a reluctance to really back yourself. I am worth this amount of money. I think a lot of people have a habit of underestimating what their worth is.
Yeah, is that goes to not truly understanding the value that you deliver.
Exactly.
So you've chugged along, you've won some sales, you've got a business, but that I think the fear that you will lose some customers is a very real one, and I think the sense of just measuring yourself in terms of price, it's natural, it's familiar, but to fully answer the value you might offer takes a fair bit of thinking and digging around, doesn't it? It's not natural for some people to think of it that way.
Yeah. My favourite question right now to talk to when I'm talking to companies, customers, is fill in the blanks. I use this product because my blank went from blank to blank. Now, it's the old Blankety Blanks TV show, remember that?
Yeah, I do.
And it's just 3 blanks, but you cannot answer that question properly without telling someone what value they're getting from your product. My blank went from blank to blank. So, like if you look at online accounting software, for example, you might go, I use online accounting because my invoices get paid in 15 days was 30 days. So, boom, you've got a 50% reduction in the time it takes to get paid an invoice.
Yeah,
that's value. That's getting right to the heart of things.
Yeah. Okay. As you say, 17 years is extreme, but I suspect at the moment that with our cost of living crises, etc., that there's there would be some industry, and some businesses where it's about survival. So we need to think about it in a different way, because you can hang on and you can survive and you can discount and you can keep it where it was for so long. Where it often comes up for me is, I'm looking at numbers to establish the market value for sale of a business, and I think in terms of driving profitability, one of the first places a lot of people look is, what can I cut? What are my expenses? The idea of looking at pricing is sort of simple and intuitive, but I don't think it happens as much as it should.
No, and I think there has been a long established view that perhaps cost cutting is an easier exercise than price changes and price increases. And there is research that gets repeated time and time again, which will show that a 1% improvement in price will typically lead on average to a 10% improvement in the bottom line, because it just flows straight through to the bottom line. A 1% improvement in fixed costs might be 2% operating profit improvement. On variable costs, it might be 7%, and on volume, it might be 3%. But it is the most powerful profit lever. Why do people neglect it? It's a really interesting question. I think there are some people that go, it is the market or it's the invisible hand that sets pricing. It's not us. Yep. And the reason I have the logo I have, if you look at it, it is someone behind a price tag. That's the reality. Every day there is somebody behind a price tag, whether it's a CFO sitting in the corner office or it's a salesperson out on the road. There is a person who is behind every single price point in a business, not an invisible hand like Adam Smith said there might be. So I think there's some there's a reluctance. I think people can find it easier to have a cost-cutting conversation with staff rather than having a pricing conversation with customers as well. Yeah,
it can be challenging. It's probably putting it fairly simply.
Yeah.
When depending on the type of business where you have a few key customers to go out and talk about. We need to. The reality is, those businesses in turn have their challenges, and I think there is, if you're in business, there's an understanding it until you get to the big extremely big and powerful corporates or monopolists or all along the line is, is companies that, will face their own challenges and that will at least understand the concept, the idea that pricing, can and should be reviewed regularly.
Yes, it's a process. It should be a process, not a project. And we're not too far away. Like, there are a lot of businesses right now that are doing their budgets for the next financial year, and they need to know what their prices are going to be. So this is the optimal time where you should be ready with your 2020, 25, 26 prices, not be working on them now, because you can then go to a customer and say, would you like a hand with your budget? Which is a very different conversation to, I'm putting up my prices next financial year.
I do want to go into some of with your experience, some of the ways you could go about having the conversation, communicating it. But that point you made about the flow through to bottom line from a price increase versus a saving in your margin or a saving in your operation expenses, it's very true. And you've probably done lots of modelling in your time about, if we stretch prices X%, what can we reasonably expect to retain in terms of customers? What might we lose? What's the net of that? That's the sort of, but that's probably the kind of modelling that business owners and their accountants or coaches should think about. Just to put some numbers in a spreadsheet and start to think about what would change if prices went up by a certain amount.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I've already had 2 or 3 conversations today, and both of those conversations have discussed the fact that all pricing models work in spreadsheets. That's how good spreadsheets are. Everything works in a spreadsheet, especially a pricing model. The thing about pricing is there's no laboratory, and the customer doesn't necessarily pay attention to what you've got in your spreadsheet. So yes, do a lot of modelling and stuff like that, but the reality is you've got to have an overlay of customer responsiveness. Back in 2007, I got a call from a company who said, I've launched with the wrong pricing model. Can you help me move it to a new one? And we devised a new pricing model. And at the time, this lady had 1,000 B2C customers in her business and 50 B2B customers. Her business development manager went out to all of the B2B customers, and an email went out to 1,000 customers that were B2C subscribers. And both those conversations, in the email and the face-to-face, ended with the line, we apologise, we've launched with the wrong pricing model. We need to move to this new pricing model. It's going to cost you this, and we understand if you need to go elsewhere. She didn't lose one single customer, B2B or B2C. Her revenue was up 20% on those same customer numbers 12 months later. And within 4 years, the business has been sold to a big American conglomerate.
Wow. Was that partly about being upfront and or about having a really compelling offer that that customers couldn't do without?
It was a combination of both. But it was also, I think there was also on top of that a little bit of eating humble pie and saying, we've launched with the wrong pricing model. This is what we think will fix it. And not making, giving people the opportunity to go elsewhere if they didn't like what the new model was like.
That's looking over the edge, isn't it, a bit?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, got an owner listening in, and they maybe not 17 years, but let's say they're under the pump in their business day to day. It's been a few years. Businesses, like a lot of small businesses, the belly of them produce a good wage and some benefits for the owner, some flexibility, but the number that are outstandingly profitable is pretty small. So I don't think there's a lot of businesses that could, increase their profitability significantly with a 10% increase or a 5% increase. They take the punt, they'll lose some customers, or in that case, they lost none. So what's your advice to someone sitting there who's got trepidation, fear, doesn't want to lose key customers? Where do they start? Is there a few steps that they ought to take, thinking about it firstly from where the business is at and where it might be if they don't increase pricing, and then communication or some modelling around what it could look like?
I think, yes, all of the above. So modelling is beneficial. Talking to customers is also beneficial. And communication is critical. So I think if you, I don't know how many, you've probably received just as many price change notifications as I have over the last 2 or 3 years, whether it's from subscription products you've got, electricity companies, telcos, or whatever the case may be. But there's a clear set of best practice and worst practice when it comes to communication. So you want to make it personal, you want to make it transparent, make someone responsible, focus on value, give advance notice, tell customers how much their prices are increasing. Don't be too aggressive, don't use confusing language, and don't lack empathy, for example. And I'm hearing even today that procurement managers will accept price increases. So you spoke about big corporates before. That's where you hit procurement managers. But there are procurement managers these days are going, okay, I can take a price increase, just it's not to be too much, not to be too often, and it's not going to be overnight. But procurement managers are accepting price increases. Here are the things I would look at.
One of the things that's, I think, unique to small business is businesses start when they're local, got local customers. Everything's local, and a lot of people know a lot of other people in that local environment or that industry, and they're trading, dare I say it, with friends and colleagues or known associates, and that conversation I think could be a little bit trickier.
Yes, and on top of the things we just spoke about, the communication and so forth, it's important to think, do you need to train your customers about your pricing? So there are some industries that are absolutely notorious for getting together and talking about how much is Kerr Capital charging you. I'm not paying that much, or I'm paying more than that. How come you're getting a better deal, and so forth? The guys that have nailed this are the airlines, they've nailed it for quite a long time now. I sit down next to you on a flight from Melbourne to Sydney and say, Michael, how much do you pay for your fare? And you say $200. And I go, I've paid $400. They have trained me to ask you the next question, which is, when did you book? Because I'm trained to know that if I want the cheapest fare, I need to book in advance. So the other element of pricing, price changes and so forth is, do you need to do any training of your customers?
That's it's interesting, the pathway to have those conversations. It's good business practice anyway to be talking to your customers, and it's good to. I think what sometimes is lacking is, you talked about it earlier, is the confidence in what you're bringing, and beyond just delivering on time or producing to XYZ standard. Going a bit deeper and understanding how important you are in their business, their supply chain, so that you can start to feel like maybe I've got a little bit more power or a little bit more relevance or importance inside of their business. So maybe that opens the door to, well, if I do increase my prices a little, I doubt very much they're going to turn around, and they might try to negotiate, but if you fundamentally understand you're important for some reason to them, you can have those more rational arguments about why you need to, and why it's fair that you increase your prices.
Yeah. Customers will very rarely ever tell you you're too cheap. They will always tell you you're too expensive. One of the One of the businesses I was talking to this morning says she's got 20,000 customers signed up to use her app, and she's got 10 complaining about price. I said, "You're worried about that?" She was thinking of dropping her prices. 10 out of 22,000 people, and she's thinking of dropping her prices. I said, when it gets to 10,000 or 11,000, then have a think about it. But if customers will tell you you're too expensive, but they won't tell you you're too cheap. And the moment I can understand why people struggle with pricing conversations, and I always try to reframe them as value conversations, because at the end of the day, customers are buying value. So try and reframe them as value conversations. And the other really critical thing when you're talking to customers is to ask them answerable questions. So what I mean by that is if let's say you have some sort of product and you say, "John, I'm putting my prices up by 10%. Are you still going to keep buying from me?" That's an unanswerable question. I don't know. I might not. But if you ask me, when did you last cancel your purchases with another supplier? You've asked me an answerable question, and I can use that as a proxy for whether I'm likely to cancel this thing. And that's really powerful in subscription businesses. So when was the last time you cancelled a subscription? Was it a week ago, a month ago, 6 months ago? There's your predictor of whether a customer's going to cancel or not.
And I think that reinforces the idea that you should drop a 10% increase on your customers tomorrow. Probably you need to rethink that, and you have talked there about a really sensible way to go out and chat to some customers and see what the likely response is as part of building a case for how much and when you might implement, rather than just dropping something because you're desperate.
Oh, absolutely. And the other consideration is that, particularly if you're in B2B, that your product might be on-sold. So a lot of if you're a really smart B2B business, your pricing model will be similar to your customer's pricing model. So it's almost a flow through, a pass on effect, and so forth, rather than the customer having to remassage the pricing to a form that they like it. So the other interesting question there is, how long does your customer need to change their prices if they are being passed on to somebody else? Because you might be able to put your prices up tomorrow, and that's fine, but you might not see the payback on that for 30, 60, 90 days, because your customer has to provide X days notice to their customers.
Yeah. I want to go back to the beginning for businesses who settle on a way of pricing. Some people probably sense that this is what competitors are doing, so I'll price it plus or minus 5%. That could be one way of finding out over time whether you've got a business that's viable, or other people might do some management accounting and try to come up with a fair price to recover their time and their input. But do they need to have an interim step to say, given what we're pricing now, maybe it's not a price increase that we need, it's a complete readjustment of how we price our services and product, how we get a reasonable return on that. Increasing prices from where they are today might still not address the fundamental issue of having a business that's not structured properly, that's not costed properly, and it isn't profitable. So it might be a legacy thing that 10 years ago they decided this is how they're going to charge for their service.
There's a few things to unpack there. Pricing models have life cycles. So anybody who's done marketing 101 knows about the product life cycle. But pricing models have life cycles as well. So years ago, if you were Qantas or any other airline and you were buying a jet engine for the wing of one of your 747s, you would go to Rolls-Royce or Pratt & Whitney or General Electric, and you would buy an engine and bolt it onto the wing and so forth. that pricing model has gone because the life cycle of that pricing model ended. They are now leased to the airlines on power by the hour contracts. Now, going back to what I just said before, that's a beautiful alignment with the Rolls-Royce business model to the airline's business model, because the airline is going to be charged for that engine when it is generating revenue for that airline, i.e. it's up in the air. When it's not earning them revenue, when it's sitting on the tarmac, it's getting loaded, unloaded, passengers on and off, luggage on and off, fuel on and off, they're not getting charged for the engine. So there's a beautiful alignment of pricing models there, and one that has changed over time. Nobody buys engines anymore.
Right, so that way you're aligning the use of the good is what determines the price of the good, and both parties know that, and versus one party before then buying $1 million engine and it sits unused, they're paying for it, the supplier's happy, but the customer's terribly unhappy. So yeah. That, I suppose that goes to understanding who your customers are, what their business models are.
Absolutely.
And going in together.
Yeah, absolutely.
I look at a lot of businesses and I know that their return, their profit on revenue is 3%, and it's passable. It's sustainable, but it's not. You want it to be 10 or 15%. So it could be that in some businesses they need to increase prices 50% to really make any significant difference.
And they may need to do different percentage increases on some products versus other products. So there was a great case study a couple of years back of a big American manufacturing company that actually they put their products into different segments. Now you hear customer segmentation all the time. Have your listeners tried segmenting their products? Have they got high demand, mid demand, low demand, collectibles versus mass market type products? Because they can all support different pricing strategies. And I remember the other thing I was going to touch on from your previous question was the question of setting your prices relative to the competition. I'm not a big fan of outsourcing my pricing to the competition, because your products are different, your channels to market are different, your costs are different. Why should your prices be the same when all those differences exist? So relativity, like if you can ascertain that your product has X% more value than a competitor's product, then it should be at a premium. If it's less, it should be a low. Yeah. But there are dangers associated with outsourcing price setting to your competitors.
It might have worked for a bit, but ultimately, it's not how you're going to build a really profitable business that's going to be sustainable. I think your point about there are businesses who might be $2, $3, $5, $10 million of turnover, and a pricing model could be, what happens if we increase pricing by 5%? And okay, your revenue goes from $1 million to $1.05 million, but what a lot of business owners and their advisors as well don't really fully grasp is the complexity. So it could be 3 or 4 different types of businesses that produce that $1 million of revenue, and your pricing elasticity or your capacity to increase pricing on a particular part of your business might be greater. So rather than just thinking about an overall price increase, break down your business into its component business divisions or business units and look at it that way. It's a more rational way to go about revisiting the pricing and the value you're delivering by those business units.
Yeah, and I think in days long past, you used to be able to carpet bomb with price changes. You used to be able to do 5% on the 1st of July and so forth. I think we're now in the world of laser guided price changes rather than carpet bombing. So that product can take a little bit more than that product over there. Oh, that one's actually got to go down and so forth. And you start to look at your cross price elasticity and the effect of substitutes and complements and stuff like that.
Yeah, and all the business analytics and intelligence is available now. If you
Absolutely,
really want to,
yeah.
you go Xero and MyOb, and these platforms are incredible. You're really able to drill down to what you need to produce for your tax return, and then what you need to analyse and make decisions about improving your business profitability. So, I wanted to talk about tactics. One of the and ways of diffusing the risks that you face from losing customers by saying, well, you can pay us a retainer per month.
Or a subscription.
And, yep, it's a subscription. That's one tactic I wanted to get your perspective on. There was, particularly for service-based businesses, when you're presenting proposals to say, here's my proposal, it's $20,000 for this project, versus there are three options. We can give you case A, which is 15,000. Case B is 20. Case C is 30,000, and has minimum deliverables. But you're taking the time to explain to the customer that it's their choice. And just interested in your take on those two particular pricing tactics.
So the first one, yes, there is a proliferation of subscription pricing models in professional services across accountants and so forth. For someone like me, I see my accountant once a year, so I struggle with the concept of paying a monthly, fee when I'm only seeing the person once a year. And I think that goes to the heart of a subscription model, which is, the customer needs to be seeing value month in, month out. So if there is clients that accountants and lawyers have got high involvement with, bookkeeping and stuff like that, then you've got the opportunity to prove out value month in, month out. And if there is definitely a willingness to pay a premium for the price certainty of knowing what your bill's going to be month in, month out, rather than it being, peaks and troughs due to different amounts of hours and so forth. Nobody's buying hours. Hours are not value. Hours are a cost to the customer and a way for the accountant to make money, and there's a mismatch there in terms of value. So that would be my first point. The answer to the first question on subs, they are better when you can deliver value during the life of the subscription. The other one is about, the other question you had was about choice architecture. And I do this myself, and I recommend everybody do it. Always give your customers three choices. Good, better, best, small, medium, large, call it what you want. I hate bronze, silver and gold. I think the only people that should be calling their products bronze, silver and gold should be in the sports industry, and everybody else should have a different name. Yeah. But let's talk about that. If you give your customers that one option, you've got a 50-50 chance of closing the deal, and that's it. Yes or no. If you give customers two options, you are going to force them to make a price-based decision. And roughly about 60% of the time, people will take the cheapest of those two options. But give your customers three options, and there's two things that happen. Firstly, the customer says to themselves, which one of these do I buy? Now, that's a very different question to do I buy? Which one of these do I buy? The second thing that happens is you are forcing them to make a value-based decision, because their next step is going to be, why is that one cheaper than that one, which is cheaper than that one? Look through, and I can see the differences in what I'm getting across those three products.
Yeah, you're putting it back on the customer to really think about. It's also on you to have value at each of those levels. So, but you really, you're engaging with them rather than giving them a binary yes or no.
Yeah. But it's not all about the customer as well. So I remember one of the really, I had a neighbour come across to my house a couple of years back. She said, my husband is losing money. He's not getting the right customers. He's over delivering and stuff like that. He was a leadership coach, and I said, send him over. He came over. We sat down at the big dinner table. We got a bit of A3 paper out, and we created 3 plans. And he came back. I didn't see him for a couple of months, and his wife came back. He's raking it in now. She was saying and he's getting those good high value clients that he wasn't getting, and so forth. But the best thing that he liked about it was he knew what he was meant to be doing for his customers, because there was all this scope creep happening, and it was out of control. But when he had that A3 piece of paper, he could say, "Okay, that's not in your plan. I've got to stop here. If you want that service, you've got to go up to the next plan." So it was just as beneficial for him and what he did for his customers as it was for his customers.
Yeah, you're really shining a light on yourself.
Absolutely.
The business, what are we actually, in business for? What do we deliver? What do we want to be held accountable for? And what's fair and reasonable?
Yep.
That's scope creep is
huge.
It's huge. And it's debilitating, because you come back to that I want to please, I want to, fear of losing a customer,
and it's so easy to do. I'll do that for you, no problem. And it comes back to that pricing conversation that people might be reluctant to have. Oh yeah, I can do that, but I'm going to have to charge you for it.
Yeah, and you've architected the choices for them. Just thinking of some of the more obscure business types or service types where you've been involved. Leadership one was a good example. That software, if you trades, other sort of everyday businesses where what you'd encourage them to think about doing, but any that you've worked with, you've kind of gone radical and said, this is a way for you to go to a subscription service, or...
I'll give you 2 interesting examples. The business I talk about here doesn't exist anymore because for various reasons. But it was a business called the Break Room in Fitzroy. Fitzroy. And you used to be able to go in there and smash stuff up with a baseball bat. Right, and you could let off steam, and
anger management.
Yeah, exactly. And this guy was getting referrals from psychologists who were seeing divorcees and say, "You need to go and blow off some steam. Go and smash some stuff up at the Break Room and stuff like that." And you booked a time online. And you booked a tray of crockery or whatever the case may be. If you had an old TV lying around at home, you could bring your own stuff to smash up if you wanted to. But when I was working with the business, I said to the founder, "You need to laminate a price list and stick it up in the wall in the break room, because what's going to happen is when people are in the heat of the moment and they're smashing stuff up, they're just going to go, give me more, and they're not going to care what the price was." And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So the price list for extra breakables was much more expensive than what it was if you had booked it in advance when you made the booking.
It was right there in front of you.
Yeah, just bring it on. The other interesting example, which sort of goes back to some of the things you were talking about, but particularly some of the work that you do with companies. I got approached by an online business, advertising-based business, who were expecting 2 big American competitors to enter the marketplace. Now, pricing can't solve all problems, but the founder had a hypothesis that pricing could help with this particular problem. So how could he use pricing to protect his local turf as an Australian owned and run business in the face of 2 American big guys trying to inch their way into the marketplace and so forth? So as part of that project, we developed multi-year pricing options for them. So it was a subscription-based business, but it had never It had never offered 2 or 3 year contracts. And if those Americans were going to come down here, he wanted a lot of his customers to say, you know, I'm sorted for the next 3 years. I don't need this right now.
Yep.
And boom, their attractiveness of the Australian market has declined, and you know, his value to both himself and his investors has improved.
I agree entirely with you. You don't want to use your competitors as I'm not sure the terminology you use, but to benchmark your pricing off what a competitor. But certainly monitoring your competitors is incredibly educational.
Absolutely. Much easier today with some simple AI tools. There are some AI agents out there that can really help and make that very easy.
Talk about that.
It's probably just a demo, but you can. There's some. I think it's agent.ai. There's some competitive intelligence tools there, and you could go in and say, okay, give me your website. Who do you want me to look at, and what do you want me to look at? So you could go, okay, I'm Kerr Capital. I want you to look at Smith Capital, Jones Capital, and Williams Capital, and I want you to compare pricing. And boom, 2 minutes later, you've got your answer for you. So, that's a great use of artificial intelligence in this realm.
I agree entirely. It's potentially the subject of 5, podcast interviews with the different ways to use it. But in some ways, that's quite simple. It is an agent. Go do me some research. But the point is that knowing your competitors. I had a very well-established business in Melbourne, and they faced the onslaught of a US competitor directly, and it wasn't so much in their case about they had more of a retail business, but they did understand the economics of the invading business, so they knew that at some point continual discounting, if they could hang on, that would just, they'd burn cash and they'd eventually go, this is just too hard. So they did other things as well, building community, engaging with customers. But the point, again, was that they knew a fair bit about their competitor, and they were able to adjust as required.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of legacy type businesses who they're not going to get gazumped by just one competitor. It's going to be death by 1,000 cuts, because you're going to have one kid at a garage over there, nibbling away at one part of the business, and then another kid in a garage somewhere else doing it, and it's death by 1,000 cuts rather than just one big competitor coming in and so forth. And that can be harder to deal with than just one huge American competitor or European competitor just landing in your front doorstep.
Yeah, it sure can. To monitor, to be aware what's going on in your industry, is vitally important. And with that information, you make decisions. And I do a lot of work with owners on now is very, very binary. I run a business and then I sell it. So many different ways in between those two extreme outcomes, and a lot of it is about fine tuning. Sometimes it's growing, sometimes it might be shrinking a business, getting rid of staff, focusing on one product instead of 15. But it's very much about digging deeper on your business, and one of the attractive features of one business unit over another might be that you've got more ability to charge more. Get to know your competitors, your industry, but also the mechanics and the financials of your own business. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the psychological power of feeling like you're getting paid fairly for the work you do or the price you charge. We talked a bit about fear and about competitive tension and about not wanting to upset the apple cart, but there's also a part when you run a business, you want to feel like you're getting valued for what you make or the service you delivered. And one way, very clear way, is to get nice testimonials, but also another way is for it to be reflected in the price you earn and the profits you make for what you do. Do you see a link between more successful, more happier, fulfilled owners who feel like they're charging the right amount versus someone who feels like they're constantly getting chiseled?
When I talk to more businesses that want to be Louis Vuitton and Mercedes-Benz rather than the reject shop or at IKEA. And then I tell them this story and ask them at the end, do you want to be a 5-star hotel or do you want to be a rundown grocery store? And where that comes from is a thing called the Beer on the Beach experiment, which was done by Richard Thaler, who is commonly cited as the grandfather or godfather of behavioural economics, and he won the Nobel Prize in 2017. If you've ever seen The Big Short, one of my favourite movies, he's the guy at the roulette table with Selena Gomez explaining credit default swaps. But he did a thing called the Beer on the Beach experiment in the 1980s, and he asked the students how much you would be prepared to pay for an ice cold beer on a hot day when I'm sitting on the beach and I'm going to go to the rundown grocery store at one end of the beach. And I can't remember the exact figures, but it was something like $1.50 for the beer. And then he said, okay, instead of going to the rundown grocery store, I can get exactly the same beer at exactly the same temperature from the 5-star hotel at the other end of the beach. How much are you prepared to pay for it now? And it was something like $2.65, $2.75 and so forth. Now, traditional economic theory says people should not have a difference in their willingness to pay. It is the same beer at the same temperature. There is no difference between the two. Behavioural economics says no, there is a difference. The context in which a purchase is being made also drives the willingness and the ability to pay and so forth. And that's why I often say to people, do you want to be a 5-star hotel or do you want to be a rundown grocery store? Because if you want to be the 5-star hotel, you have to have the context of a 5-star hotel. You know, you're probably going to have polished floorboards rather than polished concrete on the floor, for, just to keep it simple. Now, people might go, yeah, but I'm not running a 5-star hotel. But you can make your website look much better and so forth. Years and years ago, well, not that many years ago, I did an overhaul of a motorcycle retailer's website. Now, in the background of their pricing page was a dirt bike covered in mud and, a rider covered in mud and water and stuff going everywhere, having a great time in the dirt bike. As part of a price change, I got it changed to the biggest, meanest Harley Davidson you could possibly find as the background image. I was changing the context in which those prices were being seen. And I think that is one of the most powerful ways for people to have a think about, how they and their services are being perceived. Do they want to be a rundown grocery store or do they want to be a 5-star hotel?
And charge accordingly.
Absolutely, yeah.
It remains, every time I look at a business, that it's my first question, because your tax returns don't tell when the last price increase was, and my experience is there's a lot that have left it for many, many years for different reasons that we've talked about. So I think what we're saying is a deeper understanding of your business to make better decisions, to go out, talk to your customers before you do it, to research. So there's a number of things we've covered which are really practical and helpful, but the message is to don't leave it for 17 years and probably don't even leave it for, I don't know, what's a reasonable time? What would you say is a reasonable time for prices to be reviewed as a matter of course?
So what I would say is pricing should be a process and not a project. You should have a pricing cadence, and for your customers, there will probably be better times of the year to change prices than not to change prices. So I would try and have a cadence where there is an annual price change scheduled, but there are better reasons for changing prices than just the calendar changing from the 30th of June to the 1st of July. So on top of that, if you've got a new competitor entering the market, if you've got a rapid deterioration in economic climate, if someone decides to whack a whole lot of tariffs on products and services, if you've got competitor offering a new product, or you've got a supply problem and so forth, they are probably much better reasons to review pricing than just waiting for that calendar to change from the 30th of June to the 1st of July.
Yeah. The lever on profitability has to include a systematic way of reviewing the pricing and the value. Yeah. Agreed.
And I think the other thing about that is, we've touched on cost plus pricing is not a great way to price, but it is a great way to justify price increases.
Okay.
So if you're chocolate? The price of the raw price of chocolate is going through the roof at the moment. Customers don't necessarily care about the price of chocolate, but you can say that Cadbury can say my price is going up because the price of cocoa beans is gone through the roof.
Assuming you're coming off a base that's healthy anyway.
Yeah.
Pricing.
Yeah.
But then it's a little bit more because you can show them the evidence.
Show them what value on top of that you might have provided.
Yeah, you won't have chocolate if you don't pay the extra. That's pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
All right, John. A couple of things I just wanted to close out on. One is we'll share your details in a minute, but any blogs, books, people that you particularly follow? We hopefully we've activated a few people to think about pricing and profit increases in their business. So who do you follow? What do you read?
Oh, okay. So people, 20 years ago, I worked for a bloke who started EasyJet by the name of Stelios Hadjiouanou in the UK. Now Sir Stelios, he's not really well known down here, but he is, he would be considered in the same breath as Richard Branson, Greek Cypriot and so forth. So he's a person that, even though I worked for him a long time ago, that I learnt a lot from, and probably got inherited some of the entrepreneurial stuff that he does. Books. I read a lot of books, but when I was thinking about this question, I thought, okay, who have I read more than one of their books of? And it is an economist at University College London by the name of Mariana Mazzucato. And I got onto her after I read Mark Carney's book on value. So Mark Carney was the former central banker in the UK, Canada, and is now currently running for the Canadian Prime Minister's position. But he, in his book Values, he talks about Mariana Mazzucato's book called The Value of Everything, it actually goes back into the origins of value theory from Marx and even back to Adam Smith and so forth. I've read that book. I've read all her books. The other really interesting one is called Mission Economy, and it is such a powerful book because it's all about what the space race did beyond the space race. So because Kennedy wanted to take Americans to the moon, he did that, but out of that project came camera phones, CAT scans, LED, landmine removal technology, dust busters, ear thermostats. There was 20 other game-changing products that came out of that.
I'm reading that book, The Value of Everything, by the way.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I bought a second book of hers. Can't think of the title, but it goes way back, and it's not an easy read. It kept popping up for me this idea of, who sees value in what ways, and so therefore, what I do, what you do, it's going to get perceived differently. So therefore, the opportunities to price differently. I saw it in a very practical way. I used to run a lot of, I call them expression of interest processes for sale of businesses. And I did a lot of work in a particular sector 5-10 years ago, and we go to market with an asset or an opportunity, and we'd give them everything there was except the price. They had to, if they wanted to participate, and they were attractive opportunities, if they wanted to participate, they had to put their price. And it was fascinating that this opportunity was, and the range over, I probably ran 10, 15 of these processes. The range of values, high to low, was 250%. Extraordinary, because we didn't know what they wanted out of this business opportunity. We could never know that. So, but we let them tell us, and they'd say, "But what do you want?" No, here's all the numbers. Is everything you need to know. You just tell me what it's worth to you. Frustrated the bejesus out of a lot of people, but we got offers, and they ranged. If one was 200 grand, another one could be 500 grand.
And this is probably something that we've cryptically spoken about, but it's probably worth calling out specifically in this context. One of the reasons to talk to customers is because value is subjective. How you value a business and how I value a business are two completely different ways, two different things. And that is why, and pricing's the same. What you'll pay for something or what I'll pay for something are two different things. That's why you need to talk to customers, because all value is subjective.
Yeah, that's right. And that's and don't assume that that what it is for you is the same as what it is for someone else. All right. The last question: if you were running Australia's federal small business department and you were top dog, what would your 3 priorities be to ensure the ongoing success of our small business economy?
This is a cracker of a question, and I think probably many of your listeners and other guests have probably gone, you want less red tape and you want less taxes, the latter especially if you're in Victoria. But my third one might be a little bit interesting. I don't think governments should mess around with pricing in capitalist democratic economies. So and governments have been intervening in markets for 4,000 years, from ancient Egypt in 2800 BCE right through to the present day, whether it's price floors, price ceilings. But whatever they do, pricing always finds its own levels. People will find ways around it. Now that can apply to the current. This episode will go out after the election, but there is a lot of electioneering going around about rent controls and stuff like that. That backfires. The pricing will always find its own levels in capitalist and democratic economies. And I recently read a book by the Irish economist David McWilliam, and there's a fantastic example of this and the law of unintended consequences in that book. And in the 19th century in Delhi, when the Brits were in charge, there was a plague of cobras in Delhi. And the Brits decided they were going to offer a bounty on every dead cobra that was brought into the mare or whatever the case may be. So sure enough, on the day that this bounty started, the cobras came in. And they came in, and they came in, and they kept coming in, and they kept coming in. And they've got, hang on, we know there was not this many, the plague isn't that big. The unintended consequence was people were breeding cobras. It was money for jam.
Yep.
And, I think whether it's price ceilings, price floors, maximum price increases and so forth, whatever it is, banning surcharges, junk fees, things like that. Businesses in capitalist economies will always find ways around it. So my third thing would be don't mess around with pricing.
Yeah. Okay.
Price control.
Well, we haven't had that one, but we have had some interesting, and I'm going to put out an update at the half year, because it's something I started, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 episodes ago, and people have thought about it, and it's going to be a great list. Jon Manning, thank you so much for your time today. It's the first time I've really covered this very specific but very important topic, and I'm encouraging everyone to make their business more viable, more profitable, but don't just go to the expense line and start thinking about how you can chop out things. Start to think about
the big line at the top,
the value, and so you've provided us with some really insightful and helpful tactics, strategies, thought starters. So thank you. If someone wants to reach out, we will put everything in the show notes, but one quick way to get to you, is it LinkedIn the best way?
Direct, so pricingprofits.com and get in touch page.
Okay.
Phone number.
And that's profits, PROPHETS.
Correct.
The foretelling type of.
Correct, yeah. So there's a get in touch page there. There is a link to my Calendly. People can grab a pro bono 30-minute discovery call if they want, or email or phone number. I think LinkedIn's losing its way a little bit, so that will get you to me quicker than perhaps waiting for a response on LinkedIn these days. But I get around to it eventually.
Yeah, no, that's good. No, we'll put both, but we'll go to pricingprofits.com. So, Jon, really do appreciate your time and your expertise and interest. Thank you so much.
Pleasure chatting, Michael. Thank you.